John Arrington, Commissioner of the Department of Public Safety. The captain who is in charge of Capitol Security let me know just before yesterday's press conference that there was a protest scheduled for about 5 o'clock leaving from Minneapolis and the conversation was that they were going to take down that statue of Christopher Columbus. The State Patrol organized a team of about 25 troopers at the Capitol. They took the protocol that we have that we've always used, and in fact, it's the protocol that we use regularly when we have protests, to have a senior representative of the State Patrol to go out, talk to the folks that are organizing the protests, and then create what are the rules we're going to have here. Is this a peaceful protest? Is this going to be an aggressive protest? And that determines what our position is. The captain went out with a representative from the Department of Public Safety, Nigel Perrault. He's the Native American liaison from the Department of Public Safety, to have that conversation with the protest leader. As they were having that conversation, members of the group threw a rope around the statue and pulled it off.
With all due respect, our video shows a very passive negotiation went on for several minutes where the leader of the protesters told the trooper very specifically, we're going to put a rope around that and we're going to pull it down. He then, minutes later, walked away, left the protesters and the statue unattended, and it came down minutes later. That doesn't sound like there was any effort made to protect it. The bigger group of troopers didn't show up until minutes after the statue was on the ground.
I don't agree with that. From what I know about this is he went out there to have that conversation. They were having the conversation. The rope went around the statue, and as the statue came down, the troopers were coming out of the Capitol to secure that area. They were not able to get out there in time.
Governor, could you just talk about the destruction of public property, even if it's a symbol that you don't agree with, because you've got a very potentially volatile special session about to start. There's a lot of artwork and things in the Capitol that maybe people don't agree with, and now people have seen what appears to many in the public as the willful destruction without any resistance from security, and they're concerned about where this is going to lead.
Yeah, well, there will be consequences. This was an act of civil disobedience. The people doing it clearly understood and were prepared to take those consequences. Each of these incidents is deciding, and we've seen it in this room over the last few weeks, the criticisms of being too aggressive with the use of chemical weapons and other non-lethal, and then some cases of being overly aggressive with them. The leaders on the ground have to make a decision that we're in. These people came, and I think I certainly do not condone, nor is this the right way to go about this change. I do think to the public out there, and don't confuse the random burning of a liquor store with an act of civil disobedience, and it doesn't mean that we're condoning the behavior, but I think to understand the motivating factors that were there. I say this as someone from Mankato who has spent every December 26th for the last couple decades down on the Sidon Riverfront where 38 Dakota were hung. There is a lot of emotion around this, as there were with the paintings in the Capitol, as there were with Bede-Makaska, as there is with the seal, and I mentioned this yesterday. So I want to be very clear. There will be consequences for this. They will be accordingly to what our laws are about doing this. We are going to, and I'm going to tell people, we have to create a system where people feel like we can have a debate and an outcome on this. But quite honestly, I think when it comes to the Capitol grounds, many folks don't know how to do that, and I'm not certain they feel like there's a way to remove them. So I just want to be very clear. I won't condone the behavior. There will be consequences for it. It was an act of civil disobedience that we need to make sure people feel that there is a proper outlet to address what are legitimate concerns around what they view as a genocidal monument that they have to walk to in their democracy.
You've been very outspoken about that statue. You're also ahead of the commission that could have done something about it peacefully. Have you attempted to do that, or when you were in the legislature, did you propose legislation to remove it?
So first of all, I'm not going to perform for folks I'm not going to feign sadness. I will not shed a tear over the loss of a statue that honored someone who, of his own admission, sold 9 and 10-year-old girls into sex slavery. So let me start there. In my role as the Capital Area Architectural and Planning Board Chair, or the CAP Board as it's called, I want to be really clear. We need to follow a process that's important and, frankly, long overdue about the artwork, the imagery, the symbols within the Capitol building and on the Capitol grounds. All Minnesotans should feel safe and welcomed and valued when they step into and on the grounds of their house, the Minnesota State Capitol. And to be clear, the current process is not well defined. We have had these conversations at the CAP Board, and we will continue these conversations because even those who are familiar with state government have not heard of the CAP Board. And this indicates that we need to do things differently. In partnership with the Minnesota Historical Society, we need to evaluate and re-evaluate what is displayed at the Minnesota State Capitol. We need to build a process that is accessible, proactive, community-driven, and transparent. In the terms of the statue of Christopher Columbus, I wish we had a better process that had been followed. I wish the removal had been different, but I am not sad that it's gone. Columbus' legacy was setting in motion generations of violence, rape, and genocide against Indigenous people who were already here when he arrived. We have this myth of a man that Columbus sailed the ocean blue in 1492. And now my daughter knows Columbus as the man who got lost and hurt people. Placing a statue of a historical figure on the Minnesota State Capitol confers an honor to their legacy. There is no honor in the legacy of Christopher Columbus. To remove a statue or choose not to place one there in the first place is not an erasure of history, but a reckoning with it. And I will just say, we've had these conversations for a long time. To answer your question, Tom, I was one of the co-authors on the need to remove that statue and to rename Columbus Day Indigenous Peoples Day, which I am still in support of. Go ahead, Theo.
A couple of things. One is you're the chairwoman of the Capitol. The executive secretary told me today that it's your power to call a meeting whenever you wish. When is the meeting going to be scheduled, and what do you want the CAP Board to do now that the statue's coming?
Yes, that's a great question, Theo. Thank you for that. So the most recent meeting that we had was March 10th, where we talked about how exciting it is, frankly, that a statue of Nellie Stone Johnson is about to be added to the Capitol. And I can't think of a better person who embodies the kind of legacy that we want to honor in the state of Minnesota. In November, we talked briefly about the Columbus statue, and now we will enter into a process in partnership with the Minnesota Historical Society. We'll be talking about that later today, about what that looks like, when we'll schedule that. Also knowing that we're in this time of COVID-19, so we'll have to be a little creative with what that looks like. But I am going to say that Minnesota is ready for this conversation. It is clear in this moment that these images, that the artwork, that the pieces, frankly, the state seal that our state was founded upon, have everything to do with this moment that we find ourselves in right now. And even the two paintings that were removed from the governor's reception room when Governor Dayton was in office were placed on the 3rd floor, where there's not as much traffic. And there was some interpretation of that artwork, which was necessary, because not everyone agreed with the depictions in those paintings, myself included. But in some ways, that has been the most Minnesota nice response to how we deal with racism. We're going to take it out of this room, and we're going to hide it away, and we're not going to talk about it. So we are done with those kinds of processes. It is interesting, and I use that in the most Minnesotan way possible, that I am the head of the CAP board in this moment. I take that responsibility incredibly seriously. I will work in partnership with the other members of the CAP board, along with the Historical Society, to ensure that we create a capital and environment where everyone feels safe and welcomed and included, and the very important conversations that we need to have here, that we are creating an environment where people can reimagine and they can dream what is possible together. Thank you.
Free-for-all? I mean, if you're going to call that an act of civil disobedience, what are you going to call it if a right-wing group decides that they're going to tear down the statue of Floyd B. Olson because he was too close to the communists?
Yeah, well, these are the conversations that the Lieutenant Governor's talking about. We have to be able to have them. We have to create a space. I think the situation is people don't feel like there's a space to have this. They don't feel like there's a space to have that discussion. And I think what comes out of this is, and she's right, it's in the context of the moment that we're in, we need to do that. And I, again, say there will be consequences that I think are going to be fully accepted by the people who did it. We wanted to make sure, and again, this is a dangerous act. We don't want the statue falling on anyone. I think many of us were surprised it wasn't anchored. I mean, there's a lot of questions that come out of this, but I'm not saying that we're going to condone it, but I think the Lieutenant Governor's point on this is that what that symbolizes and what we haven't talked about can lead to those types of things. So I'm ready for this conversation. I think those are valid questions to ask. We have to have society that functions in a peaceful manner and that moves forward. But I do think it's important. And if those who want to try and make the case that this is equivalent to randomly burning or looting a store by indigenous people who have been speaking up for generations, the very people who did this have been trying for years to get it removed. That's a very different thing.